Welcome back to the other side. We're going to try to keep this momentum going with another upload, and this one is of the horrifying, allegedly true stories of a search and rescue officer from the U.S. Forest Service. So sit back, relax, get you a cup of hot chocolate, put on your pajamas, slip on the fuzzy bunny slippers, and let the other side come to you through the power of the internet and bring you some spooky vibes. I wasn't sure where else to post these stories, so I figured I'd share them here. I've been a search and rescue officer for a few years now, and along the way, I've seen some things that I think you guys would be interested in. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time, they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff, and they can't find their way back. A majority of them have heard the old "stay where you are" thing, and they don't wander too far. But I've had two cases where that didn't happen. Both of these cases bother me a lot. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were together, and both of them went missing at around the same time. The parents lost sight of them for just a few seconds, and in that time both kids apparently wandered off into the vast wilderness. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out and searched the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked her where her brother was, she said he had been taken away by the bear man. She said that he had given her berries and told her to stay quiet and that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. When she last saw her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of any other human being in that area at the same time. The little girl was also insistent that this was not a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair, like a bear, according to her, and that he had a weird face. We searched that area for weeks, and it was one of the longest calls I was ever on. But we never found a single trace of that kid. The other was of a young woman who was out hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to the mother, her daughter climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and she never came back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name and looking for her, before they called for help. Again, we searched everywhere, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could have possibly gone because neither her mother or her grandpa saw her come down. A few times I've been out on my own searching with a canine, and they've tried to lead me up straight cliffs. Not hills, not even rock faces. Straight, sheer cliffs with no possible handholds. It was always baffling, and in these cases we usually find the person on the other side of the cliff, or miles away from where the canine had left us. There's typically not an in-between. I'm not sure what the reason is. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it's sort of strange to me. One particularly sad case I was involved in involved the recovery of a body. A 9-year-old girl fell down an embankment and got impaled on a dead tree at the base. It was a complete freak accident, but I'll never forget the sound her mother made when we told her what happened. She saw the body bag being loaded into the ambulance, and she let out the most haunting, heartbroken wail that I've ever heard. It was like her whole life came crashing down around her, and part of her had died with her daughter. I heard from another search and rescue officer that she had killed herself a few weeks after it happened. She couldn't live with the loss of her daughter. On another case, I teamed up with another search and rescue officer because we received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip when he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get where we figured he'd be. We found him, trapped in a small crevice with a broken leg. It was not pleasant. He had been there for almost 2 days, and his leg was obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper. I heard from one of the EMTs that the guy was absolutely inconsolable. He kept talking about how he had been doing fine climbing the mountain, and we had gotten to the top. A man had been there. He said the guy had no climbing equipment, and he was wearing a parka and ski pants. He went up to the guy, and when the guy turned around, he said he had no face, just blank and featureless. He freaked out and ended up trying to get off the mountain too fast, which is why he'd fallen. He said he could hear the guy all night trying to climb down the mountain to him, letting out these horrible, muffled screams. That story bothered the hell out of me, and I'm glad I wasn't there to hear it. One of the scariest things that I've ever been involved in was the search of a young woman who had gotten separated from her hiking group. We were out until late night because the dogs had picked up a scent, and when we found her, she was curled up under a large, rotted log. She was missing her shoes, her pack, and she was clearly in shock. She didn't have any injuries, and we were able to get her to walk back to the base camp with us. Along the way, she kept looking behind us and asking why that big black man with black eyes was following us. We couldn't see anyone, so we just wrote it off as some weird symptom of shock. But the closer we got to the base, the more agitated this woman got. She kept asking me to tell him to stop making faces at her, and at one point, she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone. She wasn't going to go with him, according to her, and she wouldn't give us to him. Once we calmed her down and finally got her to keep moving, we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. It was kind of like a coughing sound, but more rhythmic and deeper. It was almost insect-like. I don't know how to describe it really. When we were within sight of base camp, the woman turns to me, and her eyes are as wide as I can imagine a human being can open them. And she touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up because he doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar, and I have no idea how this woman saw it. Right after she says it, I hear that weird coughing sound right in my ear, and I almost jump out of my skin. I hustled her to base camp, trying not to show how freaked out I was, but I have to say, I was extremely happy when we left that area that night. This is the last one I tell, and it's probably the weirdest story I have. Now, I don't know if this is true in every search and rescue unit, but in mine, it's sort of unspoken. This is a regular thing we run into. You can try asking about it with other search and rescue officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say anything about it. We've been told not to talk about it by our superiors, and at this point, we've all gotten so used to it that it doesn't seem weird anymore. On just about every case where we're really far into the wilderness, I'm talking 30, 40 miles at some point, you'll find a staircase in the middle of the woods. It's as if you took the stairs from your house, cut them out, and put them in the forest. Just copied and pasted. I asked about it the first time I saw some, and the other officer I was with told me not to worry about it, that it was normal. Everyone I asked said the same thing. I wanted to go check them out, but I was told very sternly that I should never go near them. I just sort of ignore them now when I run into them, because it happens so frequently. I have a lot more stories, and I suppose if anybody's interested, I'll tell them tomorrow. If anyone has any theories about the stairs or if you've seen them too, please let me know. So I logged back on tonight, and I was blown away by the staggering amount of interest this post seemed to have generated. So first off, I'll address a few things you guys have brought up. There have been an overwhelming amount of people mentioning the similarity between my stories and those of David Paulide's. I assure you, I'm not trying to rip him off in any way. I've got nothing but respect for the guy. He's actually what inspired me to write this, because I can verify a lot of the things he talks about. We do have a lot of strange missing persons cases, and most of the time, they aren't solved. Either that, or we find them in places they have no business being in. I personally haven't been on many calls like that, but I'll share a few that I've seen and a story that my friend told me that relates to this. There's also been a lot of feedback about the stairs, so I'll touch on that briefly here. I'll also include a story. They come in a variety of shapes, sizes, styles, and conditions. Some are pretty dilapidated, just ruins, but others are brand new. I saw one set that looked like they came from a lighthouse. They were metal and spiral, almost old-fashioned. The stairs don't go up infinitely, or farther than I can see, but some sets are taller than others. Like I said before, just imagine the stairs in your house as if somebody cut and pasted them in the middle of nowhere. I don't have any pictures. It never occurred to me to take pictures after the first time, and I don't really feel like risking my job over it. I'll try again in the future, but I can't really promise anything. And finally, a few people expressed confusion about the guy who ran into the man with no face. Just to clarify, when the climber ascended and reached the top peak, he saw another man in a parka and ski pants. The man in parka and ski pants was the man with no face. Alright, on to the news stories. As far as missing person cases go, I'd say about half the calls I get are related to that. The others are rescue calls, people who have fallen down and hurt themselves. We're a tight team, and we have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes these cases where we never find any trace so frustrating. One in particular was upsetting for all of this because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't been home when he should have. Apparently, he had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medicine and had suffered a seizure out on the trail. Before you ask, I have no idea why this man was out on the trail alone, or why she didn't go with him. I don't ask that kind of things because past a certain point, it doesn't matter. Someone's missing, and it's my job to find them. We go out and start the standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our veterans found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up with him and followed, spreading out in a fan to make sure we were covering as much ground as possible. Suddenly, a call comes in over the radio telling us all to head back to the vet's location and come right away. This usually means the missing person is injured and we need a full team to help get them out safely. We meet back up, and the vet is just standing at the base of a tree with his hands on either side of his head. I ask my buddy what's going on, and he points up to the branches of the tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there's a walking stick dangling from a branch at least 30 feet off the ground. The little strap on the handle has been looped around a branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far, and we don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We crawl up into the tree and look around. There's no one in it, obviously, and we're all left just sort of scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, and they lose his scent long before the tree. Eventually, the search is called off because there's other calls to attend to, and past a certain point, there's not much we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for months, asking if we found her husband, and it was heartbreaking to hear her getting more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call in particular was so upsetting. I think it's more the sheer improbability of it and the questions that were raised. How the hell did this guy's cane end up there? Did somebody kill him and toss that there as a weird trophy? We did our best to find them, but it was almost like a taunt. We still talk about that case from time to time. Missing kids are the most heartbreaking cases. Doesn't matter what circumstances they go missing under, it's never easy, and it's always the cases we dread. We also dread the ones where we find them deceased. It's not common, but it does happen. David Paulides talks a lot about kids, search and rescue teams, finding places they shouldn't be, or couldn't be. I can honestly say I've heard about this kind of thing happening more than I've seen it, but I'll share the one that I think about a lot that I witnessed personally. A mother and her 3 kids were out for a picnic in an area of the park that has a small lake. One is 6, one is 5, and the other is 3. She's watching all of them really closely. According to her, she never lets them out of her sight at any time. She never saw anyone else in the area either, which is important. She packs up their stuff and starts to head back to the parking area. Now, this lake is only 2 miles into the woods, and it's on a very clearly established trail. It is almost impossible to get lost from the parking area to the lake unless you're deliberately going off the path like an imbecile. Her kids are walking in front of her, and when she hears what sounds like somebody coming up the path behind her, she turns around, and in the 4 or so seconds she's not looking, her 5-year-old son vanishes. She's figured he stepped off the trail to pee or something, and she asks the other 2 where he went. They both tell her that a big man with a scary face came out of the woods next to them, took the kid's hand, and led him into the trees. The 2 remaining kids don't seem upset. In fact, she later says that they seem like they've been drugged. They're sort of spacey and fuzzy. So of course she freaks out and starts looking frantically in the area for her kid. She's screaming his name, and she says at one point she thinks she heard him answer. Now obviously she can't go blindly running into the woods. She has 2 other kids, so she calls the police and they send us out immediately. We respond and start the search for him. Over the course of the search, which spans miles, we never find a single trace of this kid. Canines can't pick up a scent, and we don't find anything. No clothing, no broken bushes, or literally any sign that would signify a child being there. Of course, there's suspicion that the mother did something, and this lasted for a while, but it's pretty clear that she's completely destroyed by the whole thing. We looked for this kid for weeks with a lot of volunteer help, but eventually the search dies out and we have to move on. The volunteers kept searching though, and one day we get a call on the radio letting us know that a body had been found and needs to be recovered. They tell us the location and none of us can believe it. We figure this has to be a different kid, but we go out there anyway, about 15 miles from the site that he had vanished, and sure enough, we find the body of the kid that we've been looking for. I've been trying to figure out how this kid got where he was ever since we found him, and I've never come up with an answer. A volunteer just happened to be in the area because he figured he might as well look in the places no one else has been looking, or would have think to look in the case that the body had been dumped. He comes to the base of a tall rocky slope, and halfway up he sees something. He looks through his binoculars, and sure enough, the body of the little boy is stuffed in a little rock opening. He recognizes the color of the kid's shirt, so he knows right away that it's the missing boy. That's when he calls it in. We're dispatched. It took us almost an hour to get the body down, and none of us could believe what we're seeing. Not only was this kid 15 miles from where he started, there's no possible way he could have gotten up there on his own. The slope is treacherous, and it's hard for us even with our climbing gear to get up there. A 5-year-old boy had no way to get up there, and I'm certain of that. Not only that, but the kid doesn't have a scratch on him. His shoes are gone, but his feet aren't damaged or even dirty. So it wasn't as if an animal dragged him up there. And from what we can tell, he hasn't been dead for that long. He had been out there over a month by that point, and it looks like he's been dead for a day at most. The whole thing was unbelievably strange, and it was one of the most disconcerting calls I've ever been on. We found out later that the coroner determined the kid had died from exposure. He had frozen to death, probably late at night, a day or two before we found him. There was no suspects, no answers, and to this day, it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This is one of the cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been last seen. The kid wasn't even aware he wandered that far. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad because I'm not really good with kids. I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. And as my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour and show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there, and it's a few miles away. We get there after about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area, she's pointing out places she's found people in the past, and I see something in the distance. Now, this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking lot. There's back roads you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far, but we're on state protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or maybe a makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building, but I can see whatever this thing is has straight edges. There's one thing you'll learn quickly out here is that in nature, there's rarely ever straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase. It's a fucking staircase. In the middle of the fucking woods. In a proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's a normal staircase with beige carpet, and it's about 10 steps tall. But besides it being in a house, there's no other place to see them. It looked like a video game glitch, where the house failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there and it's like my brain is working overtime to try to make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she stands there casually looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world, and I asked her, "What the fuck is this thing doing here?" She just chuckles. "Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see them a lot." I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm. "I wouldn't do that," she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. "You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them. Don't touch them. Don't go up them. Just ignore them." I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me it's best that I don't, and we end up moving on. The subject does not come up again for the rest of my training. She was right. I'd say about every 5th call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs in the middle of the woods. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20 or 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest searches or training weekends. All different kinds, all different colors. The biggest I've ever seen looked like it came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion. They were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet high. I've tried to talk to people about it, and I get the same response. It's normal. Don't worry about it. They're not a big deal. But don't go close to them or go up them. When my trainees ask about them, I give them the same response. I don't know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping that one day I get an answer. Thank you for listening. All credit goes out to Reddit user Search and Rescue Woods. I remember reading this story, this set of stories for the first time when I was in middle school, maybe as a freshman in high school. So it's been quite a while, about 10 years ago. So now that I'm actually doing more work with this channel, with the other side, I decided I need to read this. I need to recount these spooky stories. Also, if you want random facts, random pictures, everything like that, go ahead and follow us on Instagram at podcastTOS. podcastTOS. And it should be the exact same thing on Threads, podcastTOS. Now, if you're interested in following our Twitter is at TheOtherSideYT. We're going to try to be more active on there. We're going to try to do a lot more stuff. So follow that for updates. Follow that to give us some suggestions. Let us know what you want to hear. And with that, thank you